Let's talk about Judas, thief, traitor, necessary to Jesus' mission, favored disciple. I was always fascinated with the person of Judas and the role of Judas in the Christian faith. Here's a guy who walked, talked, and traveled with Jesus, knew him personally, was even the treasurer for Jesus' whole crew. Judas saw the miracles, and according to Matthew 10, probably performed some too. He heard the teachings, dined with Jesus, traveled with Jesus, and probably even saw Jesus pee off the side of a boat, went out fishing. I mean, let's be real. He's the son of God, but the man still had to pee. And yet, Judas still betrayed Jesus with a kiss for 30 pieces of silver. According to Matthew, after learning Jesus was to be crucified, Judas tries to return the money and then commits suicide by hanging. Acts gives a slightly different version, with Judas using the money to buy a field where he fell headlong, burst asunder in the midst, and all his bowels gushed out. Yummy! There are tons of theories why Judas did what he did. Luke and John say he was possessed by Satan. Matthew said it was for the money. Mark didn't assign a motive. There's tons of theories out there. Fact is, we weren't in Judas's mind, so we don't actually know why he did what he did. We just have ideas. But that whole dynamic always weirded me out when I was a kid. What Judas did raises uncomfortable questions there aren't easy answers to. His betrayal set events in motion that leads to Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, which is kind of important. So if Judas didn't do what he did when he did it, would Jesus have been able to do what he did when he did it? And you know what? People have been asking that question for a long time, especially sects of believers that would become known as the Gnostics. In fact, they were so curious about it, someone even authored the Gospel of Judas to give a different perspective on why Judas did what he did. Now, if you want more on who the Gnostics were and what made them different from traditionalists, I've got a TikTok series on the Gnostic Gospels, so if you're curious for some more background like who the Gnostics were, what they believed, check that video series out. But even better, I have a 2-hour workshop you can download, Understanding the Gnostic Gospels from a believer's perspective, and you can find that in my profile. And that workshop even includes the text, the Gospels of Thomas, Mary, Philip, and Judas. But let's discuss the Gospel of Judas, because indeed it is a real thing. In 2000, an antiques dealer turned over a leather-bound codex in her possession to an arts foundation in Switzerland. This codex was falling apart, and the dealer was hoping it would be preserved, translated, and then sold. And it was in bad shape. Now, since its discovery, this codex had a reportedly convoluted history, questionable acquirements, thievery, ransom demands numbering in the double-digit millions, some wild stuff. And before being given to the Swiss Foundation, it had been stored in a box for 20 years and had been offered to buyer after buyer, and they weren't handling it properly, even storing it in freezers and safe deposit boxes. Many of its pages were crumbling and entire sections were missing. But this wasn't any ordinary codex. This was the lost Gospel of Judas, and it was believed to be the only copy left on the planet. And on April 6, 2006, the National Geographic Society published the first English translation from the Coptic, and in 2007 released the critical edition of the manuscript to the world. And while this copy of the Codex was believed to date to approximately 280 AD, some scholars believe that the Gospel of Judas was actually a translation of an earlier manuscript dated between 130 to 170 AD. And this earlier dating supports its existence during the time of the church father Irenaeus, who blasted it as blasphemous, heretical, and fictitious history. Of course, he may have been talking about a different Gospel of Judas, but just so you know, if he had read this one, he definitely would have said the same thing. The Gospel of Judas is definitively a Gnostic work, as it depicts Gnostic Christian theology in the mid to late 2nd century. And what survives of the Gospel of Judas, it portrays Judas as a favorite disciple of Jesus who's entrusted with secret teachings. And remember, whenever you hear the words secret teaching or secret knowledge, it's like a whole Gnostic bat signal going up into the sky. And the Gospel of Judas is 16 chapters and features conversations between Judas and Jesus. And it's clear that Judas is Jesus' confidant and has a special place in his ministry. In the Gospel, Jesus tells Judas, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Which is basically Jesus telling Judas that Judas will help Jesus in his quest to free his spiritual self from his material body, freeing the eternal from the material, which is big-time Gnostic framework. So the Judas of the Judas Gospels is not the betrayer of Jesus, but actually is his most important disciple. And if that wasn't enough to tee off church authorities, the Gospel of Judas contains a lot of stuff that straight up contradicts the teachings of the mainstream church. It says that God is a luminous cloud of light in a perfect and unending realm. And there's a whole cosmology that's inserted, which I don't have time to get into specifics on, but it includes God creating a group of angels and lower gods who create physical matter and the physical human body, and how man's eventual forgetting of the perfect realm and God leads to corruption. But it's through embracing the internal God, the divine spark, so to speak, man can return to the true God's perfect and unending realm. Oh, and the Gospel of Judas mentions that the disciples completely missed the point of Jesus' message, as they were focused on the physical, and that they were wrong in teaching that those killed in the name of Jesus would be bodily resurrected, which really pushes the Gnostic narrative of physical bad, spiritual good. And thus mankind would be separated into two groups. Those with an immortal soul like Judas, who sees the God within and enters his realm when they die, or those like the other disciples who will die physically and spiritually at the end of their days because of their focus on the physical and things like sacrifice and physical sin and obedience and, oh yeah, communion, which was equated with cannibalism. And there's a lot more, but that's just the basics. So it's easy to see why church fathers didn't like it. This Gospel of Judas completely undermined all mainstream church and church father authority, which was based off the authority given to the disciples by Jesus in the accepted Gospels. So if you happen to come across any spooky, eerie videos on social media or anywhere talking about the secret Gospel of Judas with secret teachings that weren't included in the Bible, there's a reason. Because the Gospel of Judas pretty much contradicts every other gospel, and it was designed to be that way. However, the Gospel of Judas is important as it demonstrates the diversity of early Christian beliefs and practices. Ancient Christianity was not as cut and dry as we're often taught today. And if this stuff interests you and you want to go way deeper, the 2-hour workshop, Understanding the Gnostic Gospels from a believer's perspective, is available right now in my linky-dinky-doo. And when you register for the workshop, I'll even send you copies of the texts we'll be discussing, the Gospels of Thomas, Mary, Philip, and even the Gospel of Judas. To register, I'm just asking for a trade-in what you can donation, 100% of which goes towards our overseas mission and charity program, details of which can be found right there too. So, Gospel of Judas, is it real? Yes. Does it belong in the Bible? No. But it is a fascinating look into the diverse minds and beliefs of those of the early Christian faith. So God bless, and I'll see you soon.